The Philadelphia Eagles take on the Cleveland Browns this week, and whichever head coach loses is going to get fired. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso, with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today, as I am every Thursday, by Locked On NFL expert, the data queen, Michelle Majuk. On today's show, we're going to break down why San Francisco is going to beat the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. We'll talk about an incredible matchup between Jayden Daniels and Lamar Jackson, but we'll start with which coach we think is going to be fired next. Before we get into it, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Make sure that you tune in the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL and step into the barbershop with Tony Wiggins. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure to check out your team's crossover episode, but Crossover Thursday is always presented by Prize Picks. Download the app, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Michelle, the Eagles are 2-3 coming out of their bye. And if they lose to the Cleveland Browns, Nick Sirianni is going to get fired.
Now you're already giving them the loss because you said 2-3. They're 2-2. You're being a little bit mean to Nick Sirianni so far. I will say, I think Kevin Stefanski is the next coach fired because I fully think the Browns are going to lose this game to the Eagles. But you're right. I mean, if Nick Sirianni figures out some way to lose to these Browns who are straight terrible, I was going to call them garbage. I'll be nicer and say terrible. Then yeah, his seat's going to get pretty hot.
You're 100% right. I agree there. And yeah, maybe a little deadly foreshadowing for me this October on what might happen to the Eagles. But our guys, Louie and Gino from Locked On Eagles, think the same thing.
I don't know. Is it bold to say this is a must-win game? It kind of feels like it at home.
Before today, I would have said no.
Yeah.
But after seeing what transpired with the New York Jets letting go of Robert Saleh,
yeah,
the NFL, it's a week-to-week league, my friend. That's just about what we know. And to contextualize this game, a Cleveland Browns team, which is not good. So if the Eagles were to lose this game in a fashion that's very similar to the last couple games that you had played, and those wrongs of all of the Atlanta miscues and the early Saints miscues and the Tampa miscues, if those continue on against the Browns, who it's a wounded duck at this point, let's be honest, like let's call a spade, Nick Sirianni, would he be escorted out of NovaCare the next day, man? Like that's a tough situation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely would be a tough situation. Look, I think that if the Eagles lost to the Browns at this stage, that Nick Sirianni would be fired anyway, let alone coming out of a bye week. That is just unacceptable for the Eagles to lose that game. And look, the Philly market is incredibly impatient. They would only be 2-3, like you said, but at the end of the day, it's Philadelphia, and with the collapse that they had last year, the general vibes around Nick Sirianni and the organization, I don't know that they would sit on their hands. And I think that Robert Saleh getting fired kind of makes it easier on the Eagles to do it. They weren't the first impatient team. The Jets' record is 2-3 right now, I believe. So the Eagles dropping to 2-3, they could look at the Jets and be like, hey, they're only 2-3. They fired their head coach. When it's time, it's time.
I will say these are very different situations. That's why Nick Sirianni's seat will get hot. Absolutely. If they lose to the Browns, I don't think he's getting fired after this game, though, if he loses. Like, there's a big difference between Robert Saleh, who's won absolutely nothing at all. And this Jets team has had one of the worst records in the league since he's been there. And the Eagles, who went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago under Sirianni, who went to the playoffs last year. Like, it's very different. And I think it would be a very crazy decision, I should say, if they were to move on from him this quickly. But the Kevin Stefanski side, I mean, how long are you going to wait for the Browns to figure out what to do with Deshaun Watson? Because I'm getting sick of them being like, we're not going to bench him. How are you not going to bench him?
Well, listen, Michelle, I talked about this earlier this week, and my theory on this is they can't bench him. They're not allowed because the owner is the one who forced this trade for Deshaun Watson, and the owner would have to admit that he was a fool if they benched Deshaun Watson. He's the one who made the GM, made the move, forces the coach to start him, all of that. So if the owner comes down and says, okay, you can bench him, then that would be the owner admitting that he screwed everybody. And look, the owners own the team. They're billionaires. They've had incredible success, and they're just not going to admit that it's their fault. The owner right now is looking at himself in the mirror and saying, it's Kevin Stefanski's fault. Why can't he get Deshaun Watson going? So even though he was coach of the year last year and made the Browns look like one of the best teams in the NFL with Joe Flacco, which, hey, credit to Joe Flacco. He looked pretty good for the Colts right now, too. I mean, he's clearly not done, but I think that's the problem in Cleveland is that the owner won't admit that he was the one who made the foolish decision, and now he's doubling down on that. But I think I do agree with you. I think it would be a mistake for the Eagles to fire Nick Sirianni. I just think the market is super impatient there. That's why it's on the table. But if I did have to, go on to FanDuel and place a bet right now on which NFL coach I think gets fired next, it would be Kevin Stefanski. But again, I think it's all the owner trying to save his own skin and not look as bad because this coach can't fix the bad player that I went out and got.
Honestly, you're so right there. Like, I think Winston would already be in if Stefanski had a choice. I think this is fully coming up from upper management and ownership saying like, no, we're paying this guy guaranteed money. You're not sitting him. So they're 100% going to say, you know what, Stefanski, thanks for everything you've done, but we need to try something else because we're $275 million in the bucket here with this dude. We have to try another coach. That's why I do think he's the next guy gone if they don't figure this out. With Nick Sirianni, who would even take over the Eagles head coaching job? They have brand new OC in DC, so that become really hard.
Well, at least you could say the DC is Vic Fangio, and he's been a head coach in the NFL. So my guess would be, like we saw with the Jets, Jeff Olbrook, the defensive coordinator, took over. I think if they fired Nick Sirianni, they would just install Vic Fangio for the rest of the year and go with that way. Kellen Moore has been talked about as a potential head coaching candidate and done some interviews. I think that would be a mistake. So I think they would go with Fangio there. Honestly, outside of those two, just quick rapid fire here. If another guy were to get fired, it could be Zach Taylor for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's another guy on my radar but another guy who took his team to the Super Bowl, didn't win it. But I mean, how could you do that? Is there anybody else on your radar right now quickly that you think could be gone?
I mean, it has to be Doug Peterson, right? Because, I mean, they won their first game with Lawrence since, like, the middle of last year. It felt like it was forever. I mean, Lawrence lost 9 straight games. And then also, like, they just paid Lawrence. It was stupid to pay him that early, but now they owe Lawrence all this money. They have to figure out a coach that can figure out how to use him. And clearly, that's not been Doug Peterson so far.
Yeah, and they may have got their first win of the season to go to 1-4, but the Colts haven't won in Jacksonville since I was like in high school. So, that it could be very different for Jacksonville as the rest of the schedule goes further, and that could put Peterson in jeopardy. But with that being said, Thursday night football, NFC West matchup, Seahawks, 49ers, both teams kind of going in the wrong direction. And then Lamar Jackson and Jayden Daniels, maybe the two most exciting quarterbacks in the NFL this year, face off this weekend. We're talking about that on Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is a pre-alcohol probiotic drink, and it's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down this byproduct. Just remember to make ZBiotic your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel better tomorrow. I just used ZBiotic on Saturday, had a golf outing with the buddies, all of that. Took the ZBiotic as my first drink of the day, and I woke up on Sunday feeling fantastic. ready to cover all the NFL action. Make sure that you go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. ZBiotics is back with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets, period. They have the best features in the ticket buying industry, and they just got a brand new feature that makes Game Time even better. It's called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier because it filters out all the fluff and shows you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Not only do they have Game Time Picks, but they give you a panoramic view from your seat so you know exactly what you're going to be looking at when you sit down. And if you toggle on the feature in the app, you can get all-in pricing, so the price that you see is the price that you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, Michelle, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about which coach will be fired next, and there is a game that we got to keep our eyes on with the Eagles and the Browns. But there's another game that we got to keep our eyes on, and it may be one of the most entertaining matchups we have seen so far this season. It is Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens against Josh Allen. See, I'm already getting ahead of myself with the mobile dual threat quarterbacks. And Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. We already saw Lamar Jackson vanquish and dominate Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. Will he get Jayden Daniels next? Before we dive in, thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. Make sure to check out Locked On NFL in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins and step into the barbershop. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But I mentioned Josh Allen because my brain is already on mobile quarterbacks and dual threat quarterbacks. Right now, we know that Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen have been the most successful dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL over the last few years. But Jayden Daniels has come in here and proven that, hey, you got to start mentioning me in that conversation. And if the Washington Commanders are able to go to 5-1 and defeat the Baltimore Ravens, not only are we talking about Jayden Daniels as one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL and in the MVP conversation, but we're talking about the Washington Commanders as potential Super Bowl contenders at that point. Michelle, do you think that would be a step too far?
I don't know at this point. I mean, if you would have asked me this last week, I may have said, all right, let's wait. Let's wait a little bit. I want to see this defense look a little bit better. But against the Cardinals, against the Browns, I mean, that's not saying much, but they they have stepped it up. Now this offense is killing it, leading the league in points per game with the Ravens right behind them second. So this should be a nice, fun, high scoring game. But Jayden Daniels looks amazing. I have a fun little note here about Jayden Daniels. He is one of two quarterbacks to have 100+ passer rating and 300 rushing yards in his first 5 games of a season.
Shoot.
And the other one was Lamar Jackson in 2021 in his MVP season. No, 2019 was MVP season, right?
Yes.
But either way, it was Lamar Jackson. Jayden Daniels and Lamar
counts.
Jackson are the only two players to have ever done that. He's just playing lights out.
Well, here's another stat for you. Right now in the NFL, there's only 2 quarterbacks with 1,000 yards passing and 200 yards rushing, and they're Lamar Jackson and Jayden Daniels. And that's not the only stats. Listen to these stats from my guy David Harrison from Locked On Commanders.
Jayden Daniels, first rookie quarterback in NFL history to have 1,000 yards passing and 250 yards rushing in his first 5 NFL games. Just for reference, because just what we do, and the conversation's been going on out there. I've been hearing it, comparing him to Lamar Jackson. Not a fair comparison. No disrespect to Lamar, the MVP. No higher expectations for a rookie quarterback in Jayden Daniels. But in Lamar Jackson, it took him 10 game appearances. I put it that way because he played in 5 games before he started in 5 games to get 1,000 yards, and also took 10 game appearances for him to hit 250 yards rushing. Now, in his first 5 starts, Lamar Jackson did have 250+ yards rushing, but he had 731 yards passing. So even with the 5 games of little experience coming into his first 5 starts, Lamar Jackson's still not hitting those marks. So yes, Jayden Daniels is performing better than Lamar Jackson through each of their first 5 starts.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. And again, the conversation here is just about the skill set. You look at Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and what they've been able to do. Josh Allen is the only quarterback in NFL history with 4 straight seasons of 40 total touchdowns or more. So, like, we're talking about elite company that Jayden Daniels is putting himself in here with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And to go out, it's one thing to play well, but to go out and beat one of those guys who you're kind of looking up to, that would be absolutely massive.
That would be huge. That's going to put them in contender spot right there if they can go and beat the Ravens. I'll say it's really, truly impressive what Daniels is doing, because these mobile quarterbacks that you're talking about, and Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and let's put Jalen Hurts in there, they were good when they entered the league as like a playmaker, right, with their legs, but they had work to do as a passer, right? Even Lamar in his rookie season as a starter, 58 completion percentage, 159 passing yards per game as a starter. That doesn't include the games he didn't start. And then Jayden Daniels is at 77 completion percentage, 227 passing yards per game. Like, we're seeing him do it not only with his legs, which he's great at, but also with his arm. And that's really like terrifying to think what he can be when he's this good this early. It's just fun to watch Jayden Daniels.
It is. And it's funny. It brings me back to a clip that I saw of Sam Cosmi, Washington Commanders offensive lineman, and he's on the bench during their game, and he's like, man, this is the most fun I've had playing football in years. Like, I mean, a guy like Jayden Daniels, like the plays that Lamar Jackson was making against the Cincinnati Bengals, that one early on in the game where he's on the sideline and he breaks 3 tackles and then he throws the touchdown pass. It's like, that is why we watch football, is to see playmaking on that level. And it makes me wonder, right now, you would probably put Lamar Jackson in that conversation. Josh Allen has definitely come back to earth. Derek Carr trailed off in a major way. Sam Darnold, as you have pointed out plenty of times and on Thursday shows, has been good, but a lot of that is the product of the entire team. If Jayden Daniels were to beat the Baltimore Ravens and their defense this week and move to 5-1, I hinted at it earlier, but wouldn't he be the MVP of the season at this point?
He's definitely in consideration. I mean, he has to keep going. It's a long season. It's only been 5 games, but yeah, I mean, if he keeps going at this rate, absolutely. And give a tip of the hat to Cliff Kingsbury, whose offense is just thriving. He's calling the right plays. He's using Jayden Daniels correctly, and these playmakers he has in this offense. Like, Kingsbury's doing it up.
Yeah, it's a friendly reminder that just because some guys are not good head coaches doesn't mean that they are bad coaches. Cliff Kingsbury, clearly good enough to be an NFL offensive coordinator, and maybe he just wasn't ready for an NFL head coaching job at the time, and he'll be better later on in his career. But definitely, I like that point out. Cliff Kingsbury is pushing all the right buttons in Washington right now. But speaking of pushing the right buttons, the San Francisco 49ers need to turn things around. The Seattle Seahawks have come back down to earth, as we kind of predicted here on this show as well. Those teams face off on Thursday Night Football. We're going to talk about who needs this game more. It's the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, guys, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and it's for a reason. Right now, you could start the second quarter of the season with a big return on FanDuel. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out all the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. And right now, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And you're looking at $5 bets. I think this Ravens Commanders game that we're talking about, probably going to go over on the points total. If you want to check out the MVP odds, maybe lay a little down on Jayden Daniels if you believe, that's an option as well. You can do it all on America's #1 sportsbook. It's FanDuel. Make sure that you go to FanDuel.com. All right, Michelle, let's cap off this Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We talked about which coach could be fired next in a matchup between the Browns and the Eagles that may decide that fight. And then we talked about a battle between Lamar Jackson and Jayden Daniels, two of the most impressive and entertaining quarterbacks in the NFL. But there's a game tonight, and both teams are reeling right now. The San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals just beat the 49ers. It's on my mind. What an incredible comeback. That's why San Francisco is in such a bad spot. But they're taking on the Seattle Seahawks. And look, the Seahawks start out 3-0. Really, really easy schedule, though. And then they come back down to earth in a major way, losing to the Giants, which has to feel embarrassing for their coaching staff. Looking at this game between San Francisco and Seattle at 3-2 on the year, San Francisco at 2-3. Which team do you think needs this game more?
The 49ers absolutely need this game more. I guess the Seahawks 3 wins are also in the AFC, but the 49ers, all 3 losses have come in the NFC, 2 of them in the division. And they had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter in both of those losses. This team is supposed to be the strongest Super Bowl contending team out there, right? They're paying a lot of money to a lot of guys to get this thing done. And I still think they are Super Bowl contenders, but their defense on 3rd and long, terrible. I mean, they can't get off the field in 3rd and long. They're worst in the league at it. And with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and JSN, like that's going to be hard to stop them on 3rd and long in this new offense Geno Smith is thriving in. And then their red zone offense is so bad without Christian McCaffrey. Kyle Shanahan has to get more creative. This game is so important to the 49ers. They cannot lose this game this week.
Listen, I just want to say, I don't think that you're wrong per se. I don't think that you're wrong. But here's what I will say. I think that the vibes could go bad in Seattle quickly if they drop 3 games in a row. I trust the 49ers more because I've seen their players and they've had some injuries. And I think even if they drop to 2-4 and they go to 0-3 in the division, they could find a way to claw back, make the wild card, and still make their push to the Super Bowl when they get everybody healthy, if that happens. But if Seattle goes to 0-3 and then drops to 3-0, and God forbid it's, a bad win, let's say San Francisco wins by a lot or something like that, like I think it could really take wind out of the sails of the Seahawks, or let's say take the wind from under their wings from the Seahawks. I think that could be a situation where the Seahawks kind of stop believing. For me, it all comes down to the turnovers. When we did Contender Pretender, and when I talked about earlier this week, me and Luke Braun talked about teams with a winning record that we don't necessarily believe in. I took the Denver Broncos, but my number 2 team was the Seattle Seahawks because they just can't stop turning over the ball. I mean, they have had 2 turnovers. They have 7 turnovers on the year, and they have had 2 turnovers in like 3 straight games, even games that they've won. They had 2 turnovers against the Dolphins, and the Dolphins were a JV team, and they beat them 24-3, and it wasn't close, but they just keep turning over the ball. And I just wonder if they have more turnovers and they lose by double digits to San Francisco, like that could be a hole that I don't know if the Seahawks are capable, or at least I don't trust them to climb out of it. Now, I will say that my guy Corbin from Locked On Seahawks talked about another big aspect of this game that I think will go a long way to Seattle getting a win.
They have got to establish the running game, particularly Ken Walker III. And look, this is still a good linebacking core, but away from Fred Warner, they don't have Dre Greenlaw right now. He is still on the PUP list. They've had some defections of that position in free agency the last couple of years. This has been a front 7 that has at times looked vulnerable. Now, the numbers overall this year are solid, but they had a few games this year where they've had some issues slowing down the run. And in part, that's because they have had some big losses on their defensive line. The linebacker spot away from Fred Warner is not as good as it has been without Greenlaw being available. This feels like a matchup here that could swing into Seattle's favor. At the same time, we know just how darn good Fred Warner is too. So
Warner going up against Walker and Charbonnet. That by itself, that is going to be a really fun matchup. You want to see if Ken Walker III's juice, his explosiveness, can create some plays for the Seahawks, both in the run game and the passing game. I think they're going to need to get a solid game from both their running backs to have any shot to win this one on Thursday night.
To me, it's all combined. It's like if they run the ball better, they'll be in less situations where they're in maybe turnover-friendly situations. So it's kind of a combination of factors. If they can run the ball and stay out of 3rd and longs and avoid those turnover situations, then I think Seattle has a good chance to win this game. But I just think the whole momentum of the season will really come to a screeching halt for Seattle, and it'll make them question just how good they are after probably feeling pretty good about themselves at 3-0.
Yeah, I will say DK Metcalf has fumbled each of the last 2 weeks, and that was near I think both were in the red zone or close to the red zone. So it's like he has to hold on to the ball. It's like he's catching it and making good plays,
Yeah.
and then he's fumbling. So that's huge there for him. Maybe I'm just being biased here. I just don't think the Seahawks are a good team anyway. So I don't really think it matters if they lose it. Like, yes, you won your first 3 games, but now looking back at it, those wins aren't really impressive. They won by 6 points against the Broncos, let up 20 points against Bo Nix and the Broncos. They let up 20 points to Jacoby Brissett and the Patriots, and they had to go to overtime just to beat them. Cool. You beat up on Skylar Thompson. Like, none of their games so far have been impressive. I think their most impressive game, was maybe the Lions that ended up kind of being a blowout in the 4th quarter too. These 49ers, they've been so close, and they should be 4-1, like pretty easily. Like there's no reason they're down. They lose this game too. Do you know who they play next week? They play Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Like they cannot lose this game. This game is the season, I think, for the 49ers. This game is everything. I am a big 49ers fan, so I'm a lot more emotional about this. But this game right here, like, they have to win.
I'm with you, and that's why I'm taking the 49ers. I feel bad for you, Michelle, because my Thursday night picks this year have gone awry, quite honestly. But I just see no way that San Francisco cannot come out of here with a victory. I agree with you. I think they're the better team. I think they need this win, and winning this game, getting a division win, and then going and maybe beating the Kansas City Chiefs, that's exactly how you turn a season around. I don't know that they'll beat the Chiefs. We could talk about that next week, but I am going to take them to beat Seattle in this game.
Yeah, so you haven't been right on one yet, right? Can you please
I got one,
Seahawks?
okay? I got one.
Seahawks, please.
I got one of these. It was Buffalo over Miami. Okay. It was the second game of the year on Thursday Night Football. But yes, it's been a tough start to the year on Thursday night football games.
All right. I'm also taking the 49ers because it's a must-win game. They've won 5 straight against the Seahawks. Geno Smith has played pretty terribly against the 49ers. Now, the one big wild card here is that Mike McDonald defense. Now, they haven't been great with the Seahawks, right? With him as the coach of the Seahawks. But Brock Purdy struggled mightily against that defense, different players against the Ravens last year on Christmas night. So that's kind of the wild card here.
Yeah, a lot of people called Mike McDonald like a Shanahan killer because he had such good numbers against Shanahan coaching tree offenses last year. So that will be interesting to watch if it gives Seattle some sort of advantage, because clearly, different personnel with Baltimore than he has in Seattle, but he had some sort of schematic understanding of what they were trying to do and was able to have success with that. But with that being said, that is going to do it for a Thursday edition of Locked On NFL. As a reminder, make sure that you tune into the afternoon edition and step into the barbershop with Tony Wiggins. For the Data Queen, Michelle Majuk, I am the Madman, Tyler Rowland. And as I tell you guys every episode, stay safe out there.
Bye, y'all.